Welcome back to Her Rules Radio. I'm Alexandra Jameson, your hostess. And you know, this is the podcast that shows you how to live life by your own rules. Have I got a guest expert for you? Nancy Levin, thank you for coming back onto Her Rules Radio.
Yay, I'm so happy to be here again.
We've had many a deep convo, and one of the toughest areas of rules for anyone who identifies as a woman to break is boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
We are just horrible at boundaries. Well, let me rephrase that. I used to be horrible at boundaries. I've gotten a lot better.
Right.
But it's an ongoing journey.
That it is, for sure.
You have a new book out called Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free. Does that mean that you are now like the most ninja master Yoda of all with boundaries?
Well, it doesn't mean that I don't come up against all my shit all the time. But what it does mean is that I've busted a lot of myths around boundaries.
Okay.
And that has changed everything.
All right. So before we go any further, what is a boundary? What are boundaries? Let's get some definition terms on the board here, because I think most people kind of have a sense of what it is, but I would love to hear your expert definition.
Yeah, so I simply define boundaries as the limits that I set around what I will or will not do, will or will not tolerate, will or will not accept. So really, it's about knowing my own capacity and honoring my own capacity. And I think this is where it gets a little sticky, again, for most women. I think we are for much of our lives, we are celebrated for overstepping our own capacity. And so, you know, it's really most important, first and foremost, to get clear on, you know, self-locating. Where am I here? And what's okay for me, what's not okay for me. And, you know, diving in here to the misconceptions. You know, most people have this idea that boundaries are really a wall and that boundaries are restrictive and constrictive and depriving, that if I set boundaries, I'm a bitch, you know, that boundaries make me mean. And I really take an entirely different angle, which is that I believe boundaries are the way that we really carefully choose and consciously curate what we want in our lives.
So one of the, you know, I've written about boundaries myself.
I know.
And I'm deep in this work myself all the time, mainly because I'm raising another human being and trying to teach
God
him.
bless you.
Well, I love how you defined the boundaries, but I want to go back a little bit to all of our inner children to talk about why they're so challenging. And they are across the board challenging for people. Okay, every once in a while you meet a person who's like supernaturally good at it or was taught by some magical unicorn of a parent what they are and how to have them. But 99% of us, we're not asked, taught nothing. So that's just the fact, right?
Yeah.
we're not weird that we're not good at it.
Right.
And I'm going back to childhood again and just like trying to pinpoint the earliest conscious examples of how we were actively taught to not have boundaries. Tickling, like your personal space being invaded, your body being attacked, and you're supposed to laugh and like it. And if you say, hey, stop it, or I don't like this, then you are the one ruining everybody else's good time.
That's right. Yep.
Teasing, malicious teasing, or having to hug some random adult that you've never met.
Big time. Yeah.
That is like a great uncle. And you're like, I don't know this person. I don't want to hug them. Right. So there's all these little ways that we teach our children not to have boundaries.
Yeah. And we operate along the lines of, you know, I need to do what I'm told. You know, I need to be good. I need to be nice. You know, if I do this, I'll be loved and accepted. So it's all these ways in which we start, calculating, first of all, how to package ourselves to be digestible to someone else, and the ways in which we stay out of trouble or stay out of being punished or stop or don't rock the boat. We start learning these very early, that if I do XYZ or if I don't do XYZ, here's the outcome. So this is, it's the very root of all the people pleasing and all the peacekeeping and all the conflict avoiding that we then carry into our adulthood.
Yeah. And it, like, I want to talk about the different layers of boundaries, that there's, it's not just a mental or logical knowing. It's a much deeper, it can be physical, it can be spiritual, it can be energetic. Talk about that.
Very. I mean, so even when you said tickling, we are, the truth of the matter is that our body itself is the boundary barometer. It's the barometer of our truth. And we're going to feel the trespassing of boundaries in our body first before it can even get to our head. And so it's about being able to tune in to something is off. Something's not right here. This doesn't feel good. I don't want to do this. And yet, the sort of tricky piece is we're not really celebrated, or there's no advocacy for naming, I don't want to do this, or this doesn't feel good, or I don't like this, or this isn't okay with me. That doesn't happen early on for most of us.
Yeah. So talk about how you came to this understanding in your life. Oh, I'm finally feeling or seeing what boundaries are. What was your journey to being able to express them and keep them?
Yeah. So, the point I would pin as being pivotal for me was in my long marriage. As the marriage was blowing up, my now ex-husband kicked me out of the house that I bought and paid for 5 times over the course of about 18 months. And the 5th time I did not go back. And that was really the first time in my life I ever set a boundary. And it was me taking myself into account, making myself a priority, being able to dissociate and disconnect from putting his needs before mine, which was something I had done for 18 years. So it was the first time I was willing to actually put myself first, make my needs a priority, not be consumed with what would someone else think or what would be the impact on them. And so that was really for me, and that's only, it's 10 years ago, but it's still only 10 years ago. I lived, 4+ decades of my life in the space of, all the bending over backwards, all the pretzeling, all the, everything was chasing gold stars. Everything was about external validation. Everything was in reference to someone else, abandoning myself for the sake of another. And this was really the first moment that I said no, that I stopped.
So what I'm hearing is that boundaries are inextricably linked to this internal knowing. And
yeah.
So if you look back then, so that was the big moment for you. Like, I am not going back. That was your first big boundary. Looking back, are you able to pinpoint, oh, I had these physical sensations or these red flags then, and that's what that meant. That was a boundary for me.
Absolutely. And that's the first place I go with, any of my coaching clients is, look at all the red flags. It's easy, actually, in retrospect and hindsight, to recognize the red flags and to realize essentially how many of my own boundaries am I crossing in order to be in relationship with you? Because that's the fundamental piece here of recognizing that if my boundaries are being crossed, I'm the one crossing them. And most of us have this idea, people come to me all the time. I set a boundary, but he or she keeps crossing it. And the truth of the matter is people will do what they do because it's not their job. It's not anyone else's job to uphold or honor or even respect the boundary that we set. It's up to us. And so that's one of the most foundational, fundamental pieces that I feel is so important to get across and really to own. Because if we can own that we're the ones crossing our boundaries, then it moves us out of blame and victimhood into responsibility and empowerment. So if I can track back and look at the red flags and see, yep, I didn't pay attention to that. Yep, I chose not to honor that. Yep, I did this when I didn't want to. Yep, I said yes when I wanted to say no. All the ways in which we ultimately are dishonoring ourselves. All of that gets us to where we are right now.
So you talk about in your book, Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free, how boundaries are directly linked to self-esteem. So which comes first?
I think it's cyclical, like the setting the boundaries builds the self-esteem, and the self-esteem, builds the boundaries, being able to sort of do them in tandem. I think that the first piece is, as I was saying before, about the self-honoring and self-locating practice. Essentially, we're so tuned into what other people need more than what we need. And it's really a big, turning the ship around to be in the place of what do I need. Notice how often we are in the mindset of what do they think, what do they need, what do they want. Simply changing that to recognizing what do I think, what do I need, what do I want, what do I feel, and starting here instead of starting with someone else. Being able to, for me, what I think really is the boundary ninja move ultimately is this sort of 3 prongs. First, to, give ourselves permission to consider ourselves and our own needs first, let's say, consider our own needs at least as much as we're considering everyone else. Like, that's the base level. Can I consider my own needs at least as much as I'm considering everyone else in my life? And then can I consider my needs even more than I'm considering the needs of others? And then really, can I consider my needs first before I consider someone else's needs? And inevitably, I hear 2 things, always. One, someone listening might be hearing some version of, I'm telling you to consider yourself only. And that's not what I'm saying. I said, consider yourself as at least as much as, more, and before. But I never said, don't consider anyone else. And the other thing I often hear is, well, isn't that selfish? And it's like my favorite question to answer.
What's your answer?
I am a big advocate of selfishness. I think selfish gets a really bad rap.
You and me both.
Yeah, because I think what happens when we disown selfish, we go right to selfless, and we think that selfless is the badge of honor, and we disappear, we vanish. And so the way to keep ourselves on the map of our lives, the way to keep ourselves in center stage of our life, is to actually be selfish. And I look at selfish, self-care, and self-love as 3 sisters whose job it is to support us in honoring ourselves. I don't look at selfish as being a bad thing. I think it means that we're willing to consider our own needs.
Yeah. What kind of a mother am I if I put myself first? Well, what kind of a mother am I if I'm just like opening my veins and I'm like, here, take everything.
Right.
It's another.
And it goes. Go ahead.
It's another of these false dichotomies that really irks me.
Yeah, and it does. It definitely goes back to the old, put your oxygen mask on first. What we've heard a million times, but it's really true. If I want to be able to give from a place of, feeling full and give from a place of generosity, I need to be able to take care of myself. Otherwise, all I'm doing is building resentment. And resentment is a telltale sign, number 1 telltale sign that a boundary needs to be put into place.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So here's one of the sticky parts about finally feeling and speaking and sharing your boundaries with people, is that if you're already in relationship with someone, it could be family members or it could be your partner or an old friend, Or your kids, when you finally say, and maybe it's not in this language, but when you basically finally say, this is a boundary for me, people get irritated with you. Sometimes, not always, but I have noticed, you are now showing up as a different person and you're asking for them to respect you in a different way. And people can sometimes have challenge with that.
Right. Because people, you're changing the rules of engagement ultimately. People are used to you being a certain way and they're used to the relationship being a certain way. So one of the things that I feel strongly about is not making a boundary someone else's responsibility. So a boundary isn't telling someone else what to do or what not to do or what they can do or what they can't do. A boundary is me naming what's okay for me and how I'm going to take care of myself. So, for example, just sort of like a simple example, of, let's just say my mother's calling me 10 times a day. The boundary isn't, Mom, stop calling me. The boundary is, hey, Mom, I'm just letting you know that I noticed you're calling me several times a day. I'm only available to talk at 6 p.m. So just letting you know, even if you call all day long, I'll call you back at 6. And then if I pick up the phone at noon, right, I cross the boundary.
Whose problem was that?
That's right. But I see this, this is a huge, issue, especially with entrepreneurs, not only just in families and with friends and with, in love relationships, but I also see this, in business so much, as I'm sure you do too.
Oh yeah. My relationship with my email is probably the worst relationship on earth. But so actually this is interesting. This is a boundary that I borrowed from somebody else. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Feel free to borrow boundaries from other people that you find awesome, right?
Totally.
You don't have to create something out of thin air.
No. If you see something that you want to implement and works, do it.
You're like, oh, that boundary's for me too. Mm-hmm. I borrow this from somebody, and it basically, every email that I send out has a PS at the bottom that says, by the way, to walk my talk, I only look at my email once or twice a day. If you email me outside of regular business hours, you will not hear from me until the next day or maybe even 2 days later.
I have seen that email and I love it.
I get so many comments. People will write me back just to say, oh my gosh, I love your PS.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. It's an important piece because so whether you put it in an autoresponder in an email or like a PS like that, or if it's on your outgoing voicemail, I only check my voicemail at this time and this time. Here's when you expect to hear from me. Same thing when you're setting up any kind of contract or arrangement with a client. Here are the hours that I'm available. Here's my preferred way of communicating, of being in connection and contact. Any way that we can put that out there for them so that it's sort of like it eases our own anxiety at the beginning, for sure.
So how does that lead to improved relationships? Because here's the question that I hear a lot. Yeah. Well, this is going to throw angst, anxiety, irritation into a relationship if I now have boundaries. How do they actually bring us closer to the people that matter?
So the way I look at it is when we so first of all, let me back up for one moment. I believe my boundaries are between me and me first and foremost. So every boundary is between me and me, even if it involves another person. Not every single boundary needs to be verbalized because, as I was saying before, it's not anyone else's job to uphold the boundary. It's mine. If I decide I'm going to verbalize the boundary, I need to be really clear that I am in a position to uphold it, because otherwise I'm the little girl who cries wolf. And this is what happens more often than not. People set a boundary, sometimes a little messy, and then don't actually back it up with action. And so we teach people how to treat us, as we all know, And if I'm not going to honor my boundary, why on earth would I expect anyone else to? So that's sort of, baseline here. So in terms of actually sharing a boundary with someone else, I look at that as it's like I'm giving someone else a piece of my puzzle. I'm giving someone a page out of my operating manual to say, here's how I work. Here's how I operate. And again, a boundary is not telling someone else what to do or what not to do. A boundary isn't even about someone else's behavior changing. A boundary is, how am I going to do something different so that I'm not experiencing the negative impact that I have up until now, let's say.
So a moment ago, you said, even if they're messy.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk about how if you're brand new to setting boundaries, I can see that one of the challenges is our desire to get them perfect and right at first.
Yeah.
Is it okay for them to be messy at first? And what does that mean?
Yeah. So in my book and in my coaching, I, sort of just lay out a little bit of a script, a template to be able to go off of, to be able to come from the, it's basically, I feel X when you do or say Y. And in order to take care of myself, I'm going to do Z. And essentially to just start out with, here's what's going on for me. And here, and then here's what I'm going to do differently. And sometimes what happens, I'm a firm believer in less is more. So I think one of the ways things get messy is we say too much. I think things get messy when we say no and then believe that we have to give a song and a dance and a story and a reason and an excuse. So, I'm a big fan of saying no with grace and gratitude and not guilt and excuses. We don't owe anyone a reason or an excuse for saying no. And I think that messy is when, we can start out great, and then it sort of goes into this deterioration of what can ultimately lead to an argument. So what I would say about that is that's why in the script that I give, in the template, I have something that I call the company line, which is essentially just, and it's not about it being mean. It's just about it being firm about here's what's okay. Here's what's not okay. Here's what I'm going to do. And so we're keeping the onus on us to make the change.
Okay. So I like that. So there's a script, there's a template. I feel X about Y, so I'm going to do Z.
Yeah.
Cool.
Right. Yeah. And, depending on how reasonable the other person is that you're dealing with, you can build in a request. What happens often, I will say what happens often, especially if you're dealing with someone who, let's just say, is unreasonable or, a narcissist, not that I want to run around labeling people, but there are going to be people who aren't going to be responsive to a request. And we most often know if we're dealing with someone who's, going to meet us where we are. So if we're dealing with someone who's, who we know is like in the cauldron with us, who's doing the work, who's, then we can build in a request. But otherwise, I would say just go to the, here's what I'm going to do. And here's my company line, essentially.
Yeah. This came up recently in one of my creative leadership classes that I was teaching. I just read this great essay by Ursula Le Guin, the writer. And she talks about how, again, we're gendering this, but she talks about how women are often forced explicitly or just subconsciously in the culture to either be a professional creative or be a mother. You're like not allowed to do both.
Right.
And then you're judged harshly if you dare try to do both. And she was very clear. She's like, look, I've been able to work this and be a professional writer because my husband and I had very clear roles at home. And he was wholeheartedly in to do his fair share of the work in managing their lives. And this really made me start thinking about boundaries, right? They had obviously had very clear ongoing conversations about, how to manage all the stuff of life. Right. so that they could both pursue their individual passions. And what was so remarkable to me was I'm like, I have one kid. That woman has had, she had 3 children, and she's written, I don't know how many books, but it's over 50. She's written 50 books and raised 3 kids. I have one kid.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
And so it really made me think about the conversation I was going to have with you today, how boundaries prevent burnout and allow us to create what we want to create.
Amen. I mean, that's it. Boundaries prevent burnout big time. Yeah. Yeah.
And so how do you see this show up for people when they really engage in this work with you?
You know, the number one thing, and we all hear it, right? We all hear, you know, I don't have enough time, or, you know, even people seem to, and I do believe that time is really the non-renewable resource. Money is renewable. And people even, I think more now than ever, especially, you know, we are recording this amidst a global pandemic. And I hear now more than ever about, you know, lack of time and space, even more than I'm hearing about money. And, you know, I know, so my sister is, you know, she's got her husband working from home for the first time. She's got her kid, she just had one, I mean, she's had both kids at home and then one just left. She literally would go to her car to have any kind of privacy. And, you know, part of that, even her willingness to go to the car is a boundary, is I'm taking this time and space for myself, even if I'm sitting in my own driveway. But what it does is there is a recharge coming back. There's like a resurgence of resource coming back when we can set boundaries around time and space. And I see it happening now.
Yeah. I know. I'm so, I mean, okay, I wish I had learned all this stuff 30 years ago.
No kidding.
Instead of 8 to 10 years ago.
Right. I know.
You and I are on like the same timeline.
Yeah.
And I am so heartened, hopeful that my kid, who is 13, knows, he knows what boundaries are. We talk about them. Mm-hmm. He has the vocabulary. And because I hated being tickled so much as a kid, like I had the conversation with him. I was like, do you want to be tickled? I want you to tell us.
Right.
It's okay. I love that. Because it's a culture in my family, and it used to piss me off and freak me out. I was like, I want, you know, it's okay. I would love to do, if you want that, I will tickle the heck out of you. But I want you to ask first. I want you to feel safe in that. And he's so much more thoughtful than I was at that age, I think. Or he has the words.
Well, and you're giving him the platform to use his voice and to consider what most kids aren't given an option to consider.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so hopefully avoiding years of therapy.
Or even, as my sister says, she's like, I've got college fund and therapy fund.
Right. I would prefer to just have one of those.
Right.
Maybe a retirement fund instead of a therapy fund.
I know. It's funny.
So what are some of the best basic boundaries that you see across the board are like great, easy starter boundaries?
Yeah. I mean, definitely the starter boundaries are saying no, getting comfortable with the discomfort of saying no. And to take it from the place of, okay, if a direct request comes in, you either get to say no if you're ready, or you get to say, I'll get back to you tomorrow. Those are your only 2 options. And then what it does is it builds in some space to actually consider what I want, because the people pleaser in me wants to go to the knee-jerk yes. And the knee-jerk yes is always connected to a feeling of obligation or responsibility, a feeling of I want to be the hero, a feeling of I don't want someone else to be mad or upset or disappointed. So that's what a knee-jerk yes is. A real true yes is from desire. And so we have to actually build in a buffer so that I can consider, is this something I desire, or is this something I don't desire. And then again, to be able to go back with a no. And a no can simply be, thank you so much for thinking of me. I'm not available. It doesn't need to be my dog ate my homework and, like it doesn't have to be this whole, song and a dance about anything. It doesn't have to be an excuse or a reason. It can just simply be no. And it doesn't have to include an apology. And this is a big one too. And again, I think especially for women, we come in right with the apology. Mm-hmm. And so I'm also a big advocate for not apologizing for a no. And also to really be clear about a no. So in other words, if it's really a no, don't say, I'm not available right now, but maybe, maybe next week. Because all you're doing is setting up a situation for next week.
Which, by the way, they're going to come back and ask you again, which is going to take more of your time and energy. Talk about prevention of burnout.
Exactly.
Just no.
Because first of all, we all know what it's like when we say yes to something we want to say no to. And then we think within like 30 seconds, how the hell am I going to get out of this? Or we just see it sitting on our calendar, and just seeing it on the calendar is draining our energy.
Yeah. So
that can get completely prevented by saying no. And it might sound hard. It might sound scary. It's a muscle to build. It's a muscle to practice.
Yeah.
One of the things that, you had said earlier, about your PS, one of the things I did when I was writing this book is I decided I put out almost like an APB to everyone in my world, just saying, hey, just letting you all know I'm hunkered down. I'm not having lunch with anybody. I'm not doing anything. I'm not going for a hike with anybody. I'm not doing anything with anybody. So just know that if you make a request of me, I'm not going to say yes. And it was almost
I still love you.
Way. Right. I love you, all that, but I'm a big no to everything right now. And I just sort of put it out to the people in my world who I knew I needed to put it out to and who I wanted to put it out to. Yeah. And it sort of built for me just, something to be able to fall back on of, remember that I sent you this text saying I'm going to say no, I'm saying no.
Yeah. Yeah. So what have you seen happen for people who begin to create boundaries? What are the benefits of this work?
Wow. I would say the number one benefit is to be able to just be in a place of alignment of, I'm going to do what I say. Like what I say matches what I do. What I do matches what I say. Alignment around what's true for me as opposed to what hoop I think I need to jump through for you. And there is a confidence and a courage that emerges out of being able to know my limits and know my capacity so that I'm aware of not crossing the line for myself, not stepping over the boundary into someone else's territory, trying to manage their experience, not trying to manipulate something outside of me, but just to stay with what's true for me. And here's what I know about my relationships. If I'm taking really, really good care of myself, my relationships are better. Because what is the point of showing up in a relationship of any sort untrue, inauthentic? If I'm always in that mindset of what do I need to do or say to make everything be okay for you, how am I showing up in my own present moment? I'm not. I can't.
Yeah. I noticed over the last decade that it's like I've got my own back.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I trust myself more.
Yes. Yep.
And that's a really interesting shift that I could not have anticipated. Didn't expect that.
Yeah.
Oh, like I actually believe myself.
Yeah. And I think, part of that is if we believe ourselves and trust ourselves when we're willing to put our money where our mouth is, where we're really willing to stand in what's true for us, regardless of the impact. And again, I'm not saying coming from a place of being disrespectful to someone else or in any way, causing or creating any kind of harm. But we have this sort of, all or nothing approach to things. We think if I if I'm true to myself, I'm causing someone else discomfort. And it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So your book, Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free.
Mm-hmm.
I have these 3 little questions that I like to ask my guests at the end of our talk. Okay. So the first is, how did you break the rules to get to where you are now?
Ooh. You know, what comes to me first is, in terms of breaking the rules, back in the late 90s, before everyone was, on the internet, and before email was so pervasive, no one worked from home. There was no such thing as any of this. I did. I was offered a job to go work for Omega, the Omega Institute, to produce all their conferences. And I had been doing it in Boulder at Naropa University, and then Omega wanted to hire me, and they wanted me to move to Rhinebeck. And I'm like, I'm not moving. I'm staying in Boulder. And they were like, this will never work. And I said, well, if you're willing to just see what happens, let's give it a 3-month trial period. And of course it worked. And, I was like, there's phone, FedEx, airplanes, email, this will work. It's just unconventional for you. And I will say, breaking the rules then changed my entire life. I think it was 98.
Wow. That's
It changed
great.
my whole life. I have never worked in an office 5 days a week, ever. I mean, not since then. I've not, I've always, lived where I wanted to live, worked the way I wanted to work. And that also created for me a lot of courage and I would say even leverage to ask for what I wanted work-wise.
So what rules did you follow to get to where you are now?
It's so funny. I've got this, I really am by nature a good girl and a rule follower. And yet, like many of us in this scenario, in these scenarios, I have like this very good girl rule follower. And then I have this whole other side of me that, at the time unconsciously, blew up her marriage by having an affair and writing it down in a journal that my ex-husband would one day then find. And so the rules I followed were actually trying to keep it together, trying to be the good girl, trying to not get divorced, trying to not show anybody the truth of who I am, not wanting myself to see the truth of who I am. And, all that good girl stuff, in the end is the detriment.
So this is the last question. How do you decide to follow or break rules now?
It's interesting. I don't know if how do I want to answer this? I don't think I look at things as being rules now. I think I'm much more comfortable with checking in of, does this feel right or good or true? Is this a choice I want to make? At least that's something I can do. I think that, the earlier version of me who didn't make the choices I would make now didn't really see that there were other choices. And I now know that I have the capacity to consider choices and cause and effect and outcome. And from there, I guess I'm choosing to break the rules or stick within the lines.
Yeah, it's on your terms.
Yeah, it's on my terms.
Yeah. That's what boundary setting will do for you.
That's true.
So, Nancy, your book, Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free, has so much inspiration and clear steps to follow to help people who want this, who need this. And I know they can get more from you at nancylevin.com. Anywhere else you want people to follow up with you?
That's the best place to go. Everything about me is right there.
Great. So nancylevin.com. The book is Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free. Thank you so much for coming back onto the show. It was great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And thanks everyone for listening. You can go to herrulesradio.com for past shows. Please go on and leave a review where you love listening to your shows. We'll be back here next week. Thanks everybody. Mwah.
so excited that you're going to be back here with me for this brand new season of Her Rules Radio. Now, I wanted to make sure that you knew about two very cool things happening. First, my husband, Bob Gower, and I wrote a new book called Getting to Hell Yes, which is a conversation that will change your life. It's something that we use in our businesses and in our family all the time. So you can get it for free at gettingtohellyes.com, or you can download it for 99 cents in the Kindle store on Amazon. Lastly, I have a brand new way for you to help support the amazing sponsors of this show and get some very cool things in your life. You can go to herrulesradio.com/shop and find all of the wonderful makers and products that I use in my life that I have enjoyed making partnerships with. So go check out herrulesradio.com/shop, and we'll see you soon on the next episode.